Amala Mujanovic is outside her old school in Travnik, Bosnia. She often used to look at the boys on the other side of this fence, but one thing she knew for sure: she wasn't allowed to fall for anyone over there.
I was told not to go out with Catholics or those of the Orthodox faith. My own faith prescribed that. I'll be honest, I thought, before I fall in love with one of them and get into trouble at home, I'll leave it be.
Who told you that?
My mother.
The school is right in the center of Travnik. The right-hand side is very nicely refurbished and largely attended by children from Catholic families. Amala's from a Muslim family. These children still attend the grey left-hand side. There's a fence between the two, erected after the end of the war to keep the conflicting parties apart.
It's a symbol of separation. Every wall is. Disunion, discord, separation, all of these things. The fence used to seem bigger to me. Maybe they've made it smaller. That would be an improvement. But now there are these concrete pillars that didn't exist before. They're on their way to building a proper wall. I was bothered by this fence when I went to school here, and long afterwards too. You feel silly. Sometimes you think they're keeping away from you because they think they're better than you. On other days you think they're doing it because they're scared of you. Why are they scared of us?
Amala went to the school here 17 years ago. At the time, the war had been over for just 5 years. Partitioned schools were commonplace. With the war so fresh in everyone's mind, living together was harder. These days, this separation shouldn't exist anymore. The Catholic and the Muslim sections don't just differ from the outside. The students also get different history lessons. What caused the war in Bosnia between 1992 and 95, when Serbs, Croats and Muslims fought bitterly against each other? Yasmin Alibegovic is Muslim. He attends the state-run Muslim part of the school.
I think there's only one history. Everyone learns the same history. The difference is how that's interpreted. You can reach one conclusion or a different one, but we all learn the same thing.
One country, different interpretations of its history. The teacher doesn't want to comment further on that. The curricula are set by the Bosnian state. You can see the Catholic part of the school from the Muslim part. It's run by the church and was renovated with church funds. The history teacher here presents the Croat view of their history. Gabriela Radic attends 12th grade. She's a Bosnian Croat and was raised a Catholic. Her family lives in a predominantly Croatian suburb. Gabriela tells us that peace, love and understanding really isn't on the curriculum.
Our country has 3 presidents too, 3 different perceptions of history. Croats, Muslims, Serbs. Everyone wants to tell their own version of our history. We can't agree on one version, especially not on the war.
The teenagers from the Catholic school invite us to visit them in the evening. Amila is having a chat with Muslim students in the schoolyard. They're bothered by the fence too.
We're not animals killing each other. This scandal isn't necessary and it harms the children.
Amila and the Muslim students go to their favorite cafe just a few streets away. Bosnia is home to Bosnian Muslims, Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Serbs. But they tend to live in different neighborhoods. Most of them say their ethnic backgrounds hardly play a role in their everyday lives anymore, but mixed families are still rare. The main thing separating the three ethnicities in Bosnia is religion. Bosniaks are Muslim, the Croats are Catholic and the Serbs are Orthodox. There seems to be no way to bridge the divide. Amila always used to go to this cafe with her friends too. Amila may identify with her religion, but like the students, she feels like a Bosnian.
When people in our country say they're Serbs or Croats, I think that's strange. My friend here says he's a Croat, which is fine. But what's he doing in Bosnia then? I think it would be good if we all saw ourselves as Bosnians. And your religion should be a private matter. It shouldn't be an obstacle when it comes to friendship or love. We cling on to these differences because they're hangovers from the war. As soon as you talk about a different nationality or religion, many think of the war. He doesn't belong to me. I should keep away from him. It's hard to influence that thinking. It's still war.
Does the war make romantic relationships between Muslims, Bosnian Serbs and Croats impossible, even 2 decades later? Amila says there are such couples. She tries to get a friend of hers who's in a mixed relationship to talk about it on camera, but she won't.
I think people always struggle to talk about it. The reason for that could be that we've not really confronted our past at all. Nobody bears any guilt for the war. We're all victims. But on the other hand, we're all perpetrators too. Unlike the Germans, we don't have a Serbian, Croatian or Muslim Willy Brandt who got down on his knees and accepted all the blame.
Amila is a bookkeeper at the university. She lives in the centre of town with her family, a predominantly Muslim neighbourhood. That hasn't always been the case. Before the war, her parents lived in the suburbs of Travnik. On the way to her former parental home, even the road signs show which ethnic group is in the majority where. The town's name, written in Serbian Cyrillic script, has been crossed out. Bosnian Croats are now the dominant group here. Most of them are Catholic. During the war in 1992, Amila and her parents fled to Germany. She was 8 at the time. After the war, they decided to go back.
In 1997, we wanted to return home. We didn't know if it was still standing or whether it had been destroyed. Maybe someone else was living in it. When we arrived, everything was fine. My father spoke to a man who was living in the house at the time. This is where we arrived and parked the car. My father got out. People were sitting here. One of them introduced himself and said that he was the owner of the building. He went indoors and came out again with a gun. He pointed it at us and said that if we didn't leave, he'd shoot at us. I'm not fearful. Maybe I'm naive, just like my parents were before the war. But it was an ugly situation. I don't know how aware we were of it all as children in 1997. We thought it was strange that our parents started crying.
20 years after this encounter, she rings the bell again.
Hello, my name is Amila. I used to live here. I wanted to see who lives here today and if we could look around, if that's okay.
How do you want to look around?
We'd like to come in.
We bought the house 10 years ago. We lived up there, and because we didn't want to pay rent anymore, we bought it.
That's what my parents thought at the time too. They were tenants, but in 1990 they bought the plot. My sister was born in the living room here. She lives in Turkey now.
The woman doesn't know the previous occupier, the man who threatened Amila's father with a gun. She doesn't want to talk about the war years either. It's best to forget, she says, but she acquired the house legally. Although they did get financial compensation, her parents still haven't got over the loss of their house. People say they've dealt with a lot of the past, but when probed, even Amila shows they haven't really forgotten. Amila's waiting for her husband, Adem. Amila's parents wanted her to marry a Muslim, and they were happy with Adem. Adem is an imam in Travnik. He prays 5 times a day. It's his job. The two have been married for 7 years. Faris was born 5 years ago.
It was obvious to my parents that I'd marry a Muslim. I can't say I was happy or unhappy. It was just taken for granted.
It was also clear to me that I'd marry a Muslim.
His father and grandfather were imams too.
Thursday is market day in Travnik, but Amela rarely manages to shop here. She has to work 6 days a week. The average wage in Bosnia is 400 euros a month, but few people in Travnik earn that much, she says. Amela says we should visit the military cemetery behind the market while she does her shopping. The headstones there all tell the same story. The dead were all in their mid-20s when they died. 478 of them are buried in this cemetery alone. War veterans meet here regularly. This is Mevludin Smaj. He's a 41-year-old Muslim who lost almost all of his friends in the war. He was just 16 when he joined the Bosniak forces.
We were still in touch somewhat with our neighbors during the war. We met up when there was no fighting. We drank coffee. And then we all picked up our guns and took sides again. The war wasn't about ordinary people. It was for the politicians.
This Muslim man married a Serbian Orthodox woman shortly after the war, much to the annoyance of his father-in-law, who fought on the Serb side.
He shot at me, I shot at him. That doesn't mean I have to hate him. I don't hate anybody. But when the time comes that a man points a gun at you, the time comes when you have to point one back at him and kill him. Normal people can't imagine that until they're in that situation themselves.
We visit Mevludin at home. He lives just a few minutes from the cemetery, together with his wife and their 7-year-old daughter. Mevludin has no contact with his Serbian father-in-law. He's only ever seen him once when he picked up his wife. There's been radio silence ever since.
Before the war, mixed families were normal. There weren't any streets that didn't have at least one mixed couple. We never paid attention to that in Bosnia back then. I couldn't tell Croatian and Serbian names apart.
The war may be in the past, but it's still a big problem for mixed couples. They still fear they could have to choose sides if a conflict between the ethnic groups flares up again. We're back with Amela outside her school. She believes that Bosnia could become one country, even if the ethnic groups don't intermarry.
We like to say unity in diversity. We have our differences and we have to tolerate them.
What about the students in the school today? It's evening. We've agreed to meet Gabriela and Natalia. All the students go to the same bars and clubs. They all know each other, but do they ever fall in love or even marry? Back at the school, Gabriela and Natalia had already said it was normal for every ethnic group to have its own view of history. In the evening, they tell us how difficult it can become when friendships become more serious.
I have a friend. She's Catholic. She's been with a Muslim for 8 months. But they have to hide because of their families. It's not about whether they love each other, but about what people will say. That's the biggest problem in Bosnia and Herzagovina, and I think that'll continue for many years.
Boys join the girls. It's a normal evening. This cafe doesn't serve alcohol because it's mainly frequented by Muslims.
If you spend a bit of time here, you get to recognize each other. You know right away who's what ethnicity and who's what faith. That's why it's unlikely you'll fall in love with someone of a different one.
If that happens, you'll risk losing your family's trust over a boy. Never mind how strong your feelings are. You have your family. That's how we were raised.
We tell them that we can be friends, but nothing more.
Anyway, after an evening in the bar, word would have got round among the families. It's the Sunday service in the village of Kuća Gora, which is largely inhabited by Bosnian Croats. This is the way Gabriela wants to preserve her Bosnia. She intends to stay with her own and avoid any romantic entanglements with Muslims. Which is exactly what her mother wants too.
When we look back at the old Yugoslavia, the state's goal was to integrate the Christian, Muslim and Serbian communities. They wanted to create a nation of Yugoslavs, but it was impossible. The people rejected it.
A divided school in a divided country. What does the future hold for Amela's son, Faris? Will his parents tell him who he can marry? What if your son wanted to marry a Catholic?
You answer.
I wouldn't allow it. Our faith says she has to be a Muslim.
Amela?
If they wanted to meet up and go out, I wouldn't mind. But if they wanted to get married, I wouldn't want that. He shouldn't marry someone with different values to us. He could have a lot of problems in his marriage. I see that all the time. Would the child be baptized? I want my child to get married and I want grandchildren one day. There would be a lot of conflict, at the very latest, over the baptism question. I don't want him growing up with problems like that.
The school fence bothers Amela Mujanovic, but the walls live on in private lives too. The war changed people. Who knows if love will ever transcend Bosnia's ethnic divisions?